Hi guys, this is Andrew with rockclass101.com and welcome to live lesson episode number. So I wanted to let you guys know that every second Monday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be live streaming a lesson over at rockclass101.com. Now these live lessons are going to be hosted by Matt Dahlberg, and each month the topic will be different. So what's fun about the live lessons is that you're not only able to watch live, but you're also able to chat live. So you'll be able to chat with Matt and other Rock Class 101 members. So for more information on how to tune in, click this link right here or go to the site rockclass101.com and do a search for live lessons. Now on that page, you'll also be able to watch every live lesson that we've done before. So if you've ever missed one, no worries, they're all there. Now, if you can't make the live stream, don't sweat it, because the day after the broadcast, we'll be publishing it to our YouTube channel. And to go one step further, on the first Monday of the month, which is 1 week before the broadcast, we're going to have a forum post up on the site, which will cover two things. Number one, what the topic for the month's live lesson will be about. And number two, you'll be able to post your questions ahead of time. So that's great news because you're still going to be able to participate. Now to post on our forum, all you have to do is sign up for basic membership, which is 100% free, and that will gain you the ability to post on our forums. All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Matt to teach this month's lesson, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Well, let's go ahead and get started here today. We're going to talk about memorization today. Memorization is one of the most difficult and kind of interesting things when it comes to learning a musical instrument, because everyone learns at different paces, and it can be very discouraging when the first thing that you do when you're trying to memorize something is compare yourself to somebody else. Just like some people have, more naturally tuned ears, or some people can, run faster, or some people can do whatever, you're going to have elements of yourself that are different than others when it comes to memorization. So never compare your own ability to memorize something to somebody else's. So that's the most important thing with today, is just focus on yourself. Don't worry about if someone else memorized it faster, because it can be really tricky. Now, the first trick that I have for memorization, the first thing that I like to make sure people do, is break it down into small pieces. The analogy I like to make here is like you're eating something, So if you're eating a steak dinner or whatever it might be, I like the steak dinner analogy because I like steak, and because a big steak is pretty big. And if you imagine grabbing that steak and trying to put the whole thing in your mouth and chew it and swallow it, you're probably going to choke and not make it through. So it's really important when you're eating a steak dinner to cut it into small enough pieces that you can eat it. And this analogy works a couple ways, because you want to cut it into pieces that are small enough that you can easily chew them and consume them, but you also want them to be just big enough that it's satisfying. So when you're learning how to memorize something, break up the song into smaller sections, not so small that it's boring, but small enough to be easily consumed as well as satisfying to consume. So a recommendation is, let's say that you're working on a song like Puff the Magic Dragon, one of the new lessons that we just did here at Rock Class, and you're trying to memorize the song. Well, if you try to memorize the whole thing, by the time you get halfway through, you'll have forgotten everything that you did up until that point. And so you're requiring the music every time because you're trying to read it. So if you try to do maybe the first 4 bars, or maybe it's a small section of the song, so maybe instead of thinking of it as measures, you think of it as a phrase. For instance, with the lyrics might be Puff the Magic Dragon, right? That might be the first phrase to try to practice and memorize and get comfortable with, is just sitting there going, Puff the Magic Dragon. And so I'm going to pull up the music, because this is something that we just worked on, and I think a great example for this. And if I pull open Puff the Magic Dragon here on my computer, which is going slower than it should be, we're going to look at Puff the Magic Dragon as the first little section that we're playing, which is sort of and then just that much of the song, Puff the Magic Dragon, is a great place to start to work on your ability to memorize. Because if you try to do Puff the Magic Dragon lives by the sea, and you try to go too far, by the time you get through that first part, you're already going to be forgetting what you worked on. And so working on a small section like this is like taking a smaller bite of the steak and getting comfortable. So maybe it's Puff the Magic Dragon. And then the next section is Lives by the Sea. And so maybe I'll just practice that a few times. Live by the sea. Now, if you're working on that song, you might notice that the ends of measures will have pickups into the next measure, right, in the next section. Instead of thinking of it as bars, you can think of it as thoughts, as musical phrases. So if I think Puff the Magic Dragon is my first part, I'm going to first, with the music out, practice it and play it. Puff the Magic Dragon, reading the music, right? Then I'm going to flip the music around. No longer going to look at the music. Maybe I'll put it across the room just so I can't look at it. I'm going to think, okay, I need to play Puff the Magic Dragon. How did that sound? Puff the Magic Dragon. Now, you might not get it first try right away, and the trick there is to sit there and try to work on it a little bit. Try to give it, chew it a bit to try to figure out if you can figure out exactly what's needed to be played before going back and grabbing the music. Then you grab the music, you look, and you can look and see if you played it right, and hopefully you did. And then you go on to the next section, which might be Lives by the Sea. Lives by the Sea, all right? And then from there, I'll flip the music or put it across the room or whatever else, and then just try to play that little phrase. And then I'll try to play Puff the Magic Dragon Lives by the Sea. And by working on them separately like that, and then starting to put them together and thinking of them as a musical phrase, it can really help with the memorization. One of the reasons this technique works so well is because we're not just tying it to numbers on the tab, but we're tying it to an actual external resource, in this case, the lyrics of the song, referencing the original source material and trying to make a connection that way. Because the next thing that happens with memorization is that we don't want to just memorize things as they're written in the way that we see them. We want to try to find other ways to relate to the information, to create new sort of pathways for our brains to be able to connect with it. So in the case of Puff the Magic Dragon, bringing out the lyric sheet and actually trying to work on that song, from that standpoint of trying to find the lyrics and play them can really help. In fact, for a lot of people, when they're working on chord melody, solo songs of songs that have words, when they're transitioning from just reading the tab to trying to memorize, I actually recommend a little bit of a middle step, which is pull out the lyric sheet and just use the lyric sheet. Don't even use the music, and see if you can tie the notes that you're playing to the notes of the lyric sheet. At first, it's really difficult because it's a new way of approaching it. But as you get comfortable with that, it allows your brain to connect with it yet another way, which can help retain that memorization. You can think of it sort of like if you're driving to work and you have a GPS out. And if you drive to work the same way every day, and you use GPS every day, and your GPS dings to tell you to turn there or turn here, a lot of times, once that GPS goes away, if you've never driven without it going to that location, you're probably going to be really uncomfortable with trying to travel there, even if it's somewhere you've gone many times, just because you're used to the GPS telling you where to go. And the reality is that we don't really learn how to drive somewhere until we don't have that GPS. And by not having that GPS, you might get lost a little bit and you might have to look at it a different way, but you will get there. And you want to make sure that you're getting comfortable without that GPS getting there. Sheet music is like your GPS. So if you have Puff the Magic Dragon out, or whatever song you're working on, and you have the music out every time and you're reading it every single time, you're becoming dependent on that. And if you remove that from the equation, just like you remove the GPS, you actually start to learn the area much better than if you're not. So it's really critical to have that music go away. Now, just like with the GPS, you're not going to drive somewhere that's 2.5 hours away without any sort of map or guidance, right? You want to do smaller trips. The same way with memorizing music, same idea with taking smaller bites. You want to do a few bars at a time, or maybe musical thoughts at a time. Again, those musical thoughts might be like a phrase, like Puff the Magic Dragon lives by the sea, for instance, right? So it's about breaking these things down into smaller pieces and about thinking about them in different ways. So instead of it just being notes on a page, you start to see maybe you're listening to the original song and somebody sing it, for instance. Right? So I'm just checking the chat, make sure everything's still going well with the stream. Looks like everything's good, and a few people here are working on Puff the Magic Dragon, which is awesome, and a great thing for when you're working on memorizing. So just to recap, so for our first 2 points, one is take small bites. Just like you wouldn't eat a whole steak in one bite, you don't want to try to memorize a whole song at once. You want to take small enough bites that you can chew it, but big enough bites that it's satisfying. So when you're memorizing a song, it's really important to do small sections of the song that are big enough to be satisfying and fun, but small enough to be able to digest, essentially. And then the second concept that we talked about here is sort of removing the need, right? With GPS, for instance, if you drive with GPS all the time, you never drive without it. If you always practice with the sheet music in front of you, you're going to develop that as a bit of a crutch. So you want to actually remove the sheet music from that section to see how you can practice it. So when we're working on this, we want to make sure that we're doing consistent and good repetition too. Muscle memory is essentially a product of repeated motions, and good practice is essentially when you're doing the same thing correctly again and again and again. For every time you do something wrong, you have to do it twice correctly to kind of offset whatever you might have done wrong. So by doing these smaller pieces and making sure you play it correctly, you can develop a really great memorization technique. For the reference of Puff the Magic Dragon, the way I would sit here and memorize this is break these pieces, where maybe it's Puff the Magic Dragon, and that would be part one that I would sit and work on, try and make sure I'm comfortable with, flip the music, play through. Then I go on to the next section, Lives by the Sea, and I would do that. And then I would combine the two, right? So I go Puff the Magic Dragon lives by the sea. And now as we go forward, we're going into a new sort of section, right? And so we want to make sure the repetition that we make on the earlier sections is consistent. So before we move to that next section, we want to make sure we're playing that first part very consistently, the same way, and making sure that it's correct to what the music is. So that's where you have the music up, you might play with the music out, and you flip the music, play without it. Thinking of the lyrics can really help this to, again, create a different little bit of a pathway, but it's really critical to develop that correctly as you're going through. So the next section might be the and frolics in the, and then you see this is where I should really know the words, and then it goes autumn mist. So that, I think, if I'm wrong on the words, forgive me, but essentially what I'm doing is another little musical thought. And frolics in the autumn mist. And I would practice that again and again and flip the music over, play that. And then I would go to the in a land called Honolulu. Same sort of thing. It's a musical phrase. And just those first 8 bars of the song is sort of almost like 4 different musical thoughts. And it could be more or less depending on how you want to sort of interpret the words, right? Maybe Puff the Magic Dragon lives by the sea is one thought, right? And frolics in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu maybe is another one. And I'm probably butchering the words like no tomorrow. But those are segments that I'm sort of making. And before I would go on to the next section of the song when I'm working on memorizing, I would make sure that those are very comfortable, and I would practice it in different ways. So the way we can do this is we can start at the beginning and then go all the way through. But it also can be very helpful to practice backwards. Now, when I say this, I don't mean literally playing the notes completely backwards. Rather, what I mean is start with the last bar or the last musical thought and play it, and then add the one before, and the one before, and the one before that. So if it goes, Puff the Magic Dragon lives by the sea and frolics in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Again, I don't know if these are the words, but bear with me. If I do a land called Honolulu as my last section, I'll just sit there and think, okay, what is that? It goes, land called Honolulu, all right? And we would practice that. Land called Honolulu. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll play the part before this. So what comes before land called Honolulu? It might be frolicked in the autumn mist or whatever the words are. And that might be and frolic in the autumn mist, right? I'm going to practice that section and in a land called Honolulu, right? and then I'll go back again, right? And so it's what's the section before that part, right? And that's lived by the sea, right? Live by the sea, and right, and then go back again to the front. Now, that's a lot, and it's very difficult. It's only 8 bars, and that's kind of the point. Memorizing is not a fast thing. Learning a song, reading the music is much, much, much easier than memorizing one. In fact, you can see this from a lot of the lessons I teach here at Rock Class and elsewhere. You'll see me reading as I'm playing through because I didn't memorize the song of the arrangement I did because frankly, I didn't have the time to memorize it. I would make the arrangement, figure out how to play it, and then be reading the music to play it through. And when I really enjoy a song is when I really make more of that effort to memorize because again, it takes a lot more time. And I think people expect memorization to go as quickly and as easily as just learning a song and being able to look and refer. But the reality is it takes a lot longer. Going forwards to backwards, breaking up into smaller bites, and then going backwards back is a great way to make sure that you really, really learn it. Now, the only way you can start doing things like that is when you really know a song. So that brings me to sort of my next point, which is really being intimate with whatever song you're working on. And I don't just mean knowing how to play it or what notes to play. I mean listening to it. Whether that be an ukulele cover, listening to whoever you're doing the cover of, listening to that version of the song again and again and again. And if it's a cover of a song like Puff the Magic Dragon, go listen to the original a whole bunch, get it in your head and make yourself sick of the song because you're so familiar and you're so, so close with it, because that is something that you're going to be able to tap into when you're practicing to be able to help with memorization. Because if you memorize the song in your head and you can play it through, it's going to be a lot easier to play it from that same sort of standpoint, right? So with this concept of memorizing, the thing I want to sort of, say is that it takes a long time. And for songs that are very complex, you can expect a lot more practice to memorize than it would be to learn it. And it's like memorizing a poem, for instance, right? It's one thing to get really proficient at reading a poem, right? Where you're just looking at it and reading it off the lines, even if it's a poem that has maybe some tongue twisters or some sort of alliteration that makes it more difficult. But it's much, much easier to read it always, even if it's your 100th time reading it, than it would be to put that down and just recite it, right? For instance, my son really likes me reading Dr. Seuss to him, right? And Fox and Socks is his favorite, and I hate it because it's so difficult, right? But Fox and Socks, I'm getting better at reading, right? And I'm reading every word as I do it. I've done it probably 100 times at this point, and I'm still not great at it, but I can get through it. And if you were to close the book and say, "Hey, what's next?" I'd have no idea. And the reason is because I just read it cover to cover every time with him. And it would take me probably thousands of times to read it before I would get that familiarity to memorize it. If I wanted to memorize it, I would approach my absorption of that book in a very different way. I would focus on just the first page and getting comfortable with that, maybe the second page before thinking about going on to the third, fourth, or whatever else. And if you think that you can memorize a 3-page song by just playing it through every time, it's a lot like thinking you're going to memorize a Dr. Seuss book by just reading it cover to cover every single time, right? It's better to break it down into smaller pieces. And I think that that's something that people don't always realize as well with practicing on this. This also goes to lyrics when you're trying to memorize lyrics. Now, I don't sing personally, but I did notice a question in the forums about it. And when you're trying to memorize lyrics for a song, you want to try to memorize smaller pieces of it. And that really helps. And it's not just memorizing smaller pieces, though. It's also making that different connection with your brain. So I talked about before, when you're working on a song like Puff the Magic Dragon, you're doing a chord melody, to learn the words, or at least learn some of the words to be able to make a different pathway for your brain. A way that you can get more comfortable with the lyrics is write them down. So start with the song and start with a blank sheet of paper and write out the lyrics that you're supposed to sing. And you'll notice it's really hard to do because you might not have them memorized the way you want to. But by writing it out, it can really help, again, make that connection with the brain. And that gets us to this point of making sure that when you're memorizing things, you're just working really hard at diversifying the way your brain connects with what we're working on. And so playing it backwards, playing it forwards is a great way to get a different perspective. Another thing that you can do is listen to the original a lot and try to play along as you listen to the original. Even if it's in the wrong key, try to play along in your mind and think about what parts are supposed to line up where, because it really helps as you're trying to develop this memorization. So I'm going to check for some questions now to see what people are asking about memorization, and been talking a while on it now, but it's fun stuff. So Gerald says, hi. Hey, Gerald, how are you doing? Zill says, oh, tricky backwards. Yeah, backwards is a really good habit to form, but it's hard, and it makes sure that you know the things better. Robin says, 3 pages. I'm trying to memorize Moonlight Sonata. It's 9 pages. Yeah, so when you're working on a piece like that, first of all, are you doing Moonlight Sonata on the ukulele? If so, awesome. I think it is here on Rock Class, isn't it? I've got a 3-year-old. I'm totally clueless in this world. But when you're trying to memorize something that's that long, it's really it's a slog, is what it is. The longest song that I have memorized all the way through that I play the same way every time is probably Living on a Prayer, and that's not that long. I think pages wise, it's probably 7, I want to say. But the reason I know that arrangement is I've been playing it for, oh man, is it 10 years? 9 or 10 years now. Wow. Time flies. I've been playing it for a long time. And then there's an original to listen to, right? I'm trying to listen to Bon Jovi play it as I'm playing it and try and go through that way. And so, yeah, long pieces of music take a lot of time to get comfortable with. It's Evan's arrangement. Oh man. So tap out over here. Evan is just like one of the best players in the world. It's absolutely amazing. But yeah, when you're working on a 9-page arrangement, break it off into small pieces when you're first working on it, then make those pieces larger as you work through it. Eventually, you should have it segmented, maybe 4 or 5 different parts of the song that you really feel like are substantial. And by practicing those, you get comfortable. So you make it little sections, and those little sections make bigger ones, and those bigger ones make bigger ones until you get the whole song. So maybe you're practicing just the last few pages for several weeks because those are more difficult to remember, and that's okay. So let's see if there are any questions at all. I'm going to answer the ones that are here on the forums as well. And if you guys have any questions, please post them in the YouTube here. Lisa DMH on Rock Class 101 says, I'm doing much better with memorizing overall, but I struggle when there are subtle variations on a theme. Those are so hard to keep sorted out. Any tips there? Yeah, it is hard, isn't it? When you're playing the same thing 3 or 4 times, and the third and the second sound like this, and the first sounds like this, and the fourth is different, it can be very difficult to keep them straight, so to speak. So what I like to do is one of 2 things. One is the easy way out, which I don't always recommend, but I don't. I know that sounds terrible, but when I'm doing an arrangement of a song and there's a repeat, oftentimes I'll just play what I'm feeling for that arrangement. Because if you're doing an arrangement of a song, you have some element of sort of artistic license for that, and I'll play it as I'm feeling. You don't always have to do every variation of every song if it's giving you a big holdup. Now, that being said, and Drew might hit me for saying that, it is a really good idea to practice and get comfortable with variation and understand how you can separate those. So in that case, what I really recommend is thinking about each one of those variations essentially as a different song, trying to think of it as a whole different exercise where the first time through you'll practice, the second time through you'll practice, the third time through you'll practice, and you'll think of them as different essentially things to practice, individual parts. And then as you're putting them together, you're thinking of combining these parts as opposed to it just flowing into the next section. And sometimes that can cause problems when you're going through something where you start stopping because you don't remember which part's next. But all of these things are really ironed out in practice. And what it does is it tries to tie your brain to a different thought process to be able to see how you can connect with what you're playing. That's something that I'm really trying to talk about here today. Is it's not just looking at things one way, the same way all the time. Another thing that helps with practice that I forgot to mention earlier is practice frequently, but not necessarily for long periods of time. So when you're trying to memorize something, Do it in the morning, do it in the afternoon, do it in the evening. It's way more beneficial to do it once each of those 3 times than it would to just do it 4 times in the afternoon, for instance. Even though you're doing one less, by doing it when your brain's in different places, it can really help. In different places, I just mean you might be more tired in the morning or the evening, you might be more energized in the afternoon. It's just trying to allow your brain to connect with it in different ways. So yeah, when there are subtle variations, I recommend trying to think of them as different parts and practicing essentially putting them together. So Robin Boyd says, I know singing isn't really Matt's thing, but I wonder if he has any tips for memorizing lyrics. I don't really have any problem memorizing chord melodies and other instrumental pieces, but lyrics totally elude me. So yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. Write them out, I think, is the best way. I can't give a lot of advice because I don't try to memorize many words. You saw me struggle with the very first part of Puff the Magic Dragon. So you know how well I learn words. But whenever I'm trying to memorize something that's written, or something that can be written, I find that by writing it out really helps. I usually keep a journal for things, and when I want to remember something, I write it down, and that's how I get more consistent with that. Let's see if there are other questions here on the forums with it. If not, if you guys have any questions here in the YouTube video, feel free to post them as we kind of go through, because memorizing is an interesting concept. It's just your brain trying to retain things, and everyone's brain works a little bit differently. So it looks like there are no other questions on the rock class website, which is good. Let me go ahead and look at the chat here. Man, 9 pages of Moonlight Sonata. I wonder if Evan memorized it all. I bet he did. Children's brains are incredible. I'm not saying he's a child, but younger brains. I have a 3-year-old now, and this I think is a very important note for today. When I first started teaching ukulele, I was about 20 or so when I first started teaching online. And so when I first started, most of my students were older, approaching retirement age, or just older. And I remember thinking to myself, how do they not remember these things? Like I showed it, and how do they not remember? And every year, kind of get it a little bit more of how they don't remember. And then I had a kid, and now I don't remember anything. I haven't remembered anything for 3 years, it feels like. And I totally get it now. I totally get how the brain just doesn't retain information like it used to. And what I also get is how discouraging it is, because we remember times when we could remember things really well, and now it's really difficult. And what I find is as we get older, it's more important for that repetition and for the alternative methods of relation, meaning, not just playing the same thing the same way by looking at the sheet, going measures 1 through 8 over and over and over, but rather, doing measure 8 and then 7 and 8 and then 6, 7 and 8, and going backwards and flipping the page over and trying to play it from memory that way, trying to listen to the original song in our head, hear the lyrics, and play them when we're doing the chord melody. The variety of techniques for memorization is what helps memorization more than anything else, especially as you get older or have kids. Man, my brain does not work like it used to. I get it now. All you parents and older, the ukulele players, and by older I just mean out of school. I get it now. It just doesn't work as well. So let's see. It says right here. Still says, I'm the play by the rules type. Yeah, and memorizing it, funny enough, it's harder to play exactly by the rules, because if you're just making that connection to the numbers on the sheet, it takes a long time to memorize. So it's okay to make mistakes while working on memorizing something, because your brain is trying to figure out what to play. Now, it's not okay to make the mistakes over and over. We want consistency when we're playing things correct, but you can think of it sort of like putting the GPS away. If you're driving somewhere without a GPS and you make a wrong left, the best thing you can do actually is to try to figure out where you are and get back on track, not pull out the GPS, see where you went wrong, and just get back on, right? Same thing with memorizing. If you play through something and you make a mistake, don't just stop and grab the music. Sit there and think for a minute. Where am I? What comes next? Can I hear what comes next? Can I see what comes next? Can I feel what comes next? And try to sort of force yourself to go through that process, because really we don't truly learn things until we need them. One last sort of note with this is, When I was first in college and studying music theory, I was obsessed with music theory. I was obsessed with relating it to the ukulele. Now, I didn't know where the notes were on the ukulele fretboard. I knew how to figure it out, but I didn't know where they were. I tried all these memorization techniques to memorize what all the notes were on the fretboard, right? Everyone thinks, oh, I have to memorize the notes on the fretboard. And the reality is, you don't have to memorize the notes of the fretboard. In fact, you don't ever really memorize the notes of the fretboard. You do learn them though, and you learn them because you need them. And that's the little secret there is when I tried to just sit there and memorize things to memorize it, it'd be like me cramming for a test. I might remember it for a couple days, but then it all comes out in the wash, so to speak. But by needing to use something, I really would learn it better. So for me, when I started doing arrangements and I started to look at sheet music or look at, relating music theory to the ukulele, I learned the fretboard much more quickly because I had to, because I needed to use it. So by the same logic, if you make a mistake playing and your music's turned over, don't turn it back. And you'll need to learn what you need to do to be able to play the right thing. It might take a while. You might play a lot of wrong things, but you'll get there eventually. Just like if you make the wrong turn and you don't have the GPS handy, you're going to need to figure out what to do to get back. You might get lost. That's okay. It'll help you for the next time you're going through it. So, but anyways, I'm kind of rambling about a lot of this. A lot of practice stuff are these little one-liners that can really help make the connection. And if one of the things I've said today has helped in some way of thinking, oh, I haven't tried it that way before, go try it, because usually it's just the variety of ways to approach memorizing that helps. So let's see. Robin says, I have a weird thing where I'm too slow at reading tabs, so I have to memorize it. Currently through page 2. That's actually a good problem to have in the grand scheme of things, because it's allowing you to, essentially tabs is kind of the alternate way that you look at something. Some people depend so much on the tabs and have to read it. So even though that might make progress slower, that's a good problem to have. It makes you more complete. And Zil says, I have this weird thing where I have my first progressive glasses, so I can't see the tabs. Well, I'll have to memorize. And made decent progress on memorizing the first theme of Puff while listening to you. Sweet, yeah. And one last, I've said one last thing how many times now, but there's so many little one last things with practice. Another thing about practice is try to do it when you're not multitasking. Adults in this world are very busy, which I've really learned since having a kid. I feel like I have don't have the time I used to, right? So now I feel like I have to be doing multiple things with my time to be productive. The reality is, if I'm doing multiple things with my time, I'm really doing nothing with my time. If I'm trying to practice my ukulele while reading a book, while listening to music, while watching TV, I'm not going to retain any of those things that I worked on. So when you're really serious about practice, put away all of the other distractions. Just work on what you're practicing then and there. Be mindful of what it is you're working on. And I don't just mean be only playing the ukulele. I mean, be only thinking about it. If you're thinking about something else as you're trying to practice and memorize, you're going to have a lot harder of a time retaining it. And so, if you haven't meditated before in the past, I recommend trying it. It helps you kind of get a little bit more centered with your mind. And when you go to practice the ukulele, let that almost be a source of meditation, where the ukulele is the thing that you're focusing your attention on, and it can really help. 10 minutes of one-on-one ukulele time where you're just sitting with it is much more beneficial than 30 minutes of just kind of noodling while watching something on the TV. So, but that's great that you made some progress memorizing Puff there. So Gerald says, message me on, oh, cool. Gerald's got he's an ophthalmologist and giving us some suggestions. That's awesome. Love it. Ukulele communities. So very cool. So I'm going to hang around just for a few more minutes. If any of you have any questions, again, please leave them in the chat. I'll be hanging around to answer any more questions people have on memorizing. Again, there's so much to memorizing, and there's so many little things that go into play to get better at it. And I've listed a lot of kind of, one-off things that help, and I've noticed help me and have helped my students over the years as they're learning to memorize. The most important thing, though, is to know that it's not easy and not quick. and it does take time. And the more ways you can work on memorizing something, the more completely and the more proficiently you're going to be able to memorize it, meaning play it start to finish. Go the other way. Listen to the words and try to connect there. Listen to the original song. Listen to the arrangement that you're working on. Listen to someone else play it, right? Try to play it without the music. Try to play it in a dark room with a blindfold on and feel your way through, mistakes and all, just so that your brain can start to get the connection of the music you're playing in different fashions. So, Robin says the PM system in rock class is down. Oops. That's okay though. It happens sometimes. I bet it'll come back up. And so, if you guys ever have questions, feel free to post on the rock class forums. I always check those for the live lessons and kind of work off that. So let me check real quick, see if there's any more questions. And again, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to post here in the live chat. And hopefully you've memorized all of the memorization techniques. Not really. Watch this video again and every few weeks, watch it, and just once you hear something that I said that you didn't remember to try, click off the video and go try that thing, because the more ways you can work on it, the better. So, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions here on the forum, and it's looking like we're good on the chat. So I hope you guys have had a good time here talking about some of these memorization techniques, and just try using one or two of the methods as you're practicing. Don't worry about doing it all at once. Again, small bites. Eat the steak with small bites. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys next month for the next live lesson, which will be on October. What's the second Monday in October? Anybody know? It looks like it's going to be, oh wow, October 14th, because it looks like October 7th is the first Monday in October. So cool. Well, happy fall to everybody who likes that. I'll see you guys next month for the next live lesson. And thank you so much for coming and for your questions. And I hope that this helped some with learning some memorization tips and techniques. Take it easy. I'll talk to you guys soon.